Well, thank you all for joining me today. I wish I could be with you in person, maybe next year. um, but so this session is going to be about Cloud Run, which is a Google Cloud service that is serverless for containers, and we're going to walk through what all that means. And I'm not going to do any slides. I'm just going to show you all the cool things, and so we'll walk through everything. I'm a mostly Java developer. Do also Scala and Kotlin and all sorts of other things. And yeah, I'm a developer advocate at Google Cloud and work on Cloud Run and a bunch of other stuff. So hopefully this will be a useful introduction for you with Cloud Run and learning some of the concepts like containerization and some other things. So to get started, I'm on a GitHub repo of mine, and this is just like the simplest thing that could possibly work. It's a simple web server, and I'll show you how it works in a little bit. But I want to just walk through the steps to take this GitHub repo and get it up and running on the internet and with Cloud Run. So I'm going to click this Run on Google Cloud button, and this is going to take me into Cloud Shell, and I'm going to say, yep, I trust that repo because it's mine, so I trust it. And this will take me into Cloud Shell, which Cloud Shell is a web-based kind of like SSH session into a server that is just yours. So if you go into Google Cloud, you can launch Cloud Shell and do whatever you want. When I clicked that button, it took me into Cloud Shell, and it's really just automating some steps for me to take that source code that we were looking at on GitHub and get it up and running on Cloud Run. So the first thing that it did was it cloned the source code for that Hello Netcat repo. And then it's asking me to select my Google Cloud project. I have two projects that I have access to, and projects are kind of just like folders. They're a way to organize resources in Google Cloud. So I'm going to select the JW demo project. I'm going to make sure that the APIs to use Cloud Run are turned on. And then it's going to ask me, where do I want to deploy this application? And there's, I think, 20-something regions now that I can specify. I'm specifying a region, not a zone. So a zone is a particular data center, and regions have multiple data centers within multiple zones within a region. And Cloud Run will automatically keep the application running across the zone. And so that means that if a data center has an issue, that's okay. It'll just use one of the other data centers in that zone. So I'm going to select US Central 1. And now what it's doing is it's doing a Docker build. So Docker is the typical tool that is used to create containers. Containers are kind of like zip files. They contain everything that is needed to get the application running within a Docker or Docker compatible environment. So Docker compatible environments are Docker. So you can just use the Docker tool to run the container once it's created. And then you could also use Kubernetes that runs Docker containers, or you can use Cloud Run. So lots of different places to actually run your containers. What it did when it built my source code into a container is it stored it up into what's called a container registry. It's a little hard to see there because it's yellow, but this is the Google Container Registry, and it's storing it in my project and then giving it a name, Hello Netcat. So it has built that container, just that essentially zip file with everything that's needed to run this Hello Netcat application. And it initially just stores that locally, which locally in this case means local in Cloud Shell. And then I need to do a Docker push to actually push that container up to the container registry. So I've got my container created from my source code. I've pushed it up to the container registry. And now I can do a gcloud run deploy. So gcloud is the command line tool for Google Cloud. I tell it to do Cloud Run. I tell it to deploy it. I give it a name, Hello Netcat. I tell it which project. I tell it that I'm going to use the managed platform for Cloud Run. I tell it the region to deploy in. I give it the container image, which is up on the Google Container Registry. And then I tell it that I want to allow anyone to access this service that's just been deployed. So you'll see that all that just took a few seconds to be able to deploy, create the container and deploy it up on Cloud Run. And what I have now is a HTTPS served web site that is running that actual container. So you'll see that it's assigned to me a domain name that is this, got this weird text in it, but hello netcat and then run.app. So now I can go and actually click on that and it loads in my browser. I've made a request to that application. So what happens is now Cloud Run has a load balancer that says, all right, you're making a request to this hello netcat application. And what my application responds with is just hello world. So great. So my service is now up and running on the cloud. Easy. Let me actually show you what that Hello Netcat application does. It's about the most trivial thing that we could possibly do, but there is this file called a Dockerfile. So one of the ways that you can create containers is by specifying a Dockerfile, which is the instructions that are needed to create a container. And in my case, for this application, I'm creating a container. I'm starting with the Alpine Linux container. So containers have a way to do layering. So my first layer is the Alpine Linux container. And then what I do is I specify the entry point, which is the command that's going to run. And in this case, I want just the most basic HTTP server that I possibly can have. And so I'm just using a tool called netcat to listen for HTTP connections coming in, and I respond with hello world. So I didn't actually have like any real source code, no Java, no Python, no Node.js, none of that yet. We'll get to some examples that are more full featured in a little bit, but this now allows me to create with Docker the container image, which then gets run by Cloud Run and serves this HTTP response when I make a request to it. Okay, so that's all up and running and is being automatically scaled to the number of requests that are coming into the application. If there are no requests coming into this application, then Cloud Run will scale this down to using no resources. So Cloud Run automatically does what's called scale to zero. So what that means is that because it's not using any resources on Google Cloud when it's not being used, that means that I don't have to pay for anything when it's not being used. So Cloud Run has a model of billing which is based really just on what's called instance time. So when I come to my application and I make a request, I'll do another request, that makes a HTTP request to my container, and their Cloud Run, one of the reasons why it's different from some of the like function as a service platforms or cloud functions is that Cloud Run can handle multiple concurrent requests to a given container instance. So if at the exact same time 80 people make a request to this application, I'm only actually paying for the instance time that from the time that the first one starts till the time that the last one ends, which could be just milliseconds. I'm only paying for that time. And so that's a really nice usage-based billing model, which is also what we call serverless. It's just paying for what you use. So the default concurrency is 80 concurrent requests, but you can turn that up to 1,000 concurrent requests, meaning that I could have 1,000 requests coming in all at the same time, and I'm only going to pay for the instance time from the start of the first request to the end of the last request. Okay, so and it's going to auto scale. So I scale down to 0, but then I also scale up. So if my application with the default concurrency of 80, if I get an 81st concurrent request coming in, then Cloud Run will automatically scale my application up to a second instance running my application, and so on and so forth. It'll just keep on scaling up and down as demand dictates. Okay, so that's the auto scaling and billing part of Cloud Run. Let's go in and open up the Cloud Console so that we can go explore some of this stuff through the UI. So we can do everything through a command line. I can say gcloud run, and I can do deploy. I can inspect my services. So let's see what options are available in gcloud run. We can come in and look at my services, and then I can say, all right, let's list my services, and then I need to select, I want to do it on the fully managed version, and then let's see, I also need to tell it the project, so some different parameters here, which is JW demo, and again, select fully managed. There we go. Now we see all my services that I've deployed in this project. So you can do things through the command line, but you can also just come in to the Cloud Console, and we can hit this, what's called the hamburger menu over here, and go to Cloud Run. And then I'm in my JW demo project, and here we see all the services that I have deployed in this project. So all of these services work that same way. They're all probably not getting any requests. You'll see that these are just demos, so no requests per second coming into any of these applications. So they're all scaled down to 0, so I'm not paying for anything for any of these services. Okay, let's go find that Hello Netcat one, which is probably back on the first page here. Let's go back to that. And we'll then go take a look at some stuff about this service. Okay, so when I go into the service for the UI here, we'll see that I get taken to the metrics page where I can see request counts. I can see how many requests are coming in, how long requests are taking, how many instances have been spun up, and then the billable container instance time. So those are my metrics. You'll see I've got my domain name up here, which I can of course click on, takes me back to my application. I can set up my own domain name, of course. So if I want to map, whatever, jamesward.com to this service, then I can go in and set up a domain mapping for that. And then let's go on to the next tab here, which is revisions. So in Cloud Run, there's this concept of a service having many different revisions. So the revision that I just deployed 8 minutes ago, it is getting 100% of the traffic to this application. And I can go look and see all my different revisions. I can add URLs that will go to specific revisions. And then every revision has some configuration associated with it. So I've got an image here, that container image that's up on the Google Container Registry. If I've deployed from source, then I'll see some information about the build, the source code, get the port that it's listening on, and then it's using the container entry point. I can see how many CPUs are allocated. So you can come in and change configuration for CPUs, memory, concurrency, request timeout, and then auto-scaling settings as well. So that's information about how my application runs. But then there's also, for every revision, there's also a way to pass configuration to the application as well. You can do that through environment variables so that your application reads the environment variable. This allows you to have a container image that is not specific to the environment that it runs in. And that's why they're called environment variables, is that they're external to the application. So let's say I've got a database connection string or something like that. You can put that information into environment variables. There's a second way you can provide that information through something called secrets. And secrets are a more secure way to separate out the configuration from the actual container. I can set up connections through Cloud SQL. So that's our databases, MySQL and Postgres. You can set up VPC connections, or you can enable HTTP2 connections. You can set different security parameters for a service. So there's something in Google Cloud called a service account. And the service account is what dictates the permissions that the application will run as. And so my application by default is just using the default compute service account, which actually has a lot of permissions. We could go into the permission system in Google Cloud and check out what all those permissions are. But essentially, this allows my application to do almost anything it wants in my Google Cloud project. So it could go spin up a new instance. It can fully manage Google Cloud. It can talk to databases. So that I've provisioned. So the permissions that the application runs with are controlled through the service account. And you can go and set a different service account with different permissions if you want to have more fine-grained control over the permissions that the application is running with. Okay, so then one of the really cool things that I can do in this this with the revisions is that I can actually manage the traffic across the revisions. So a typical pattern when we do deployments is we maybe just want to route, let's say, 10% of our traffic to the newest version, and then we want to go back to the previous version, which was deployed earlier this morning, and let's say we route 90% of the traffic to that. And so now if I save that, now what it's going to do is Cloud Run will tell the load balancer when a request comes in, 90% of the traffic is going to go to the old version, 10% to the new version. This is called a blue-green deploy or canary deploy. And so then if I go make a request to this application, we're not going to actually see any difference because both revisions do the same thing. But this is a way that you can test that new revisions of an application are not breaking anything or working well before you end up routing all of the traffic over to the new revisions. Okay, so that's how you do what's also called traffic splitting across your revisions. Okay, so that's revisions and all the different settings. There's a number of different ways that we can deploy Cloud Run applications. So when we back up here, when that button that we clicked did our deployment, it did a command line deploy, do Cloud Run deploy. But we can also use the UI to deploy new revisions. So let's go give that a try. I'm going to hit Edit and Deploy a new revision. Now we specify the parameters for deployment. So I give it my container image that's stored up on the container registry, the container port. I can override the container command, container arguments. I can set memory, CPU, request timeout. I can increase the number of concurrent connections. I can also set some parameters for auto-scaling. So there's something called a cold start with serverless. And what a cold start is when the application needs to scale up. So let's say it's at 0 instances and it gets 1 request. Then that means that I need to go, Google Cloud needs to go and create an instance of my application running. And so that is called a cold start when that request has come in and triggered a auto-scaling event. And now the user just has to sit there and wait until that instance is ready to begin handling HTTP requests. And in some applications, that can take a while. So Java, which I primarily work with, it has to go start up the JVM. It has to do a bunch of stuff. It could take 30 seconds for a container to start up and be ready to serve requests. And so you don't probably want your user just sitting there waiting the 30 seconds until the application is ready to handle those requests. And so what you can do to work around that is you can manually set the minimum number of instances that you want to be available to handle requests in your application. And so I'll leave it at 0, and then you can also set the maximum scaling as well. And then we can tell the traffic router what to do with the traffic. And I'm going to say, yes, serve this revision immediately, which will route 100% of the traffic to it. So those are the container options. Then we can also come in and set environment variables or secrets. We can set up the different connection information that you saw earlier. And then we can also set some security parameters. So one of the security parameters that we can set, which I mentioned, was the service account. You can also control on a revision whether or not the application should be available to anyone. And let's see if that was in connections. Somewhere we can tell it if we want who we want to be able to access this service. Do we want it to be able to be accessed by anyone, just by the cloud load balancers, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or if you want the user to be authenticated and the user to have the right privileges to access this application. So you can set all those different parameters. Okay, so let's deploy this new revision so we can see what that looks like. So I hit deploy. That's just like doing that gcloud run deploy, but just doing it through the UI. And now you'll see that I've got a new revision that is being deployed just now. And the load balancer is going to take all of the traffic, 100% of the traffic, because I told it to, and route it all to that new revision. And if we go open up this application, we'll see, sure enough, it's working just like it was before. So that's all good. Okay, permissions is where we can control which users have access to this application. You'll see that because when I did the initial gcloud run deploy, I said allow unauthenticated, you'll see that all users are allowed to access this, which makes it publicly available. Okay, so that is our quick kind of run through of revisions and deployments and traffic routing and all the different parameters that you can set on that thing. There's another piece in here which we'll go look at, which is logs. So logs take all of the logs from all of my instances that may be running and gives me a UI of this. So what's happening is anything that goes to standard out or any request that comes into the load balancer, it creates a log item, and we can come in and see those log items here. So we can see that I made a request, my browser is Chrome 92, I made a GET request, and the HTTP response code was 200, and the response was 687 bytes, and it took 317 milliseconds to return that response. So, and then you can hop out to all of this. The logging stuff is actually based on the Google Cloud logging, and if you go into logging, then you get a much more full-featured way to browse through logs, set up filters. You can set alerts based on logs. So lots of different kind of operational items that you can do based on the logs that are automatically being fed from your container instance into the cloud logging service. And so the cloud logging service is universal across all of Google Cloud. So everything in Google Cloud logs to this environment. So it gives you one place to be able to deal with logs and troubleshoot things and set up alerts, that sort of thing. So, okay, so that's the Logging Explorer and logs. And there is a way in Google Cloud to tell it the log severity. So all of these logs that are in here, you'll see the I. That I is indicating that that is a informational level of log event. And oftentimes when you have a production application, you'll actually have multiple log levels. You'll have debug level, you'll have info level, you'll have error level, so on and so forth. And there is a way to enable your logs to feed the severity information into Google Cloud so that you can then, let's say, every time you get an error level alert, maybe you want to set up an error level log, maybe you want to set up an alert for that. So you can come in, and then you can also filter in the UI to see which log level you want to see when you're looking at the actual logs. And you can filter logs, that sort of thing. So all sorts of flexibility in here with logging. Okay, come over to triggers. This is where we can control the what's called ingress to our application. Do we want to allow everything to make a request? Do we only want to allow internal traffic and traffic from the Google Cloud Load Balancer? Do we only want to allow internal traffic, which makes our service private to our other services within Google Cloud? And then here's where we can set whether or not we want to require authentication to talk to the service. So that's the triggers part. Then we can also see details about our service, when it was last deployed, the region, and then we can enable binary authorization, which allows better security for our containers. Okay, so that's the parts of the Cloud Run UI. I did want to also show you the container registry, since that's where our container image is being stored. So in Google Cloud, we've got the container registry up here, and if we go look at our Hello Netcat service, and we'll find that, looks like on the next page, we will have, here we go, Hello Netcat. which is on gcr.io. And we can see that these are all of the times that I have done a Docker push with my container image. So this one, which was just created 21 minutes ago, and we can go in and see some details about this container image. We can click that deploy button. We already deployed it, but then we can see the size of my container image is only 2.68 megabytes, a pretty small container image, and tags and other information about that container image. So, so this is all just based on the Docker container format. There's also a container format that is an open container format called the was it Open Container Initiative or something like that, OCI. So kind of different ways to structure the information about a container. But there you go. You can see the container image. This Docker container image is portable, as I said, to anywhere that runs container images. So we could even run it on our local machine with Docker run. So fully portable, which is certainly nice. Okay, so that's our basic run through of containers and of Cloud Run. There is certainly you can do all sorts of things with Cloud Run. You can have database-backed applications. As I showed, you can connect a Cloud Run application to Cloud SQL, and that provides a way to connect your application to your database. You can run microservices, you can run web applications, all sorts of different things there. So whatever you want to put into a container, Cloud Run can run that for you. Okay, so I've showed you ways to deploy the application, and I showed you first with Cloud Run button the manual way to do deployment, but there are, and then I showed you the UI, showed you the command line, but for a real live application, you likely want to use something called continuous delivery to deploy the application. And I want to walk you through how we do that, because for any real production application, you really would want to set up some form of continuous delivery. And Cloud Run has an easy way to set that up for you. So I'm going to go in and create a new service. We'll call this one ASDF, a bunch of ASDFs. I'm going to give it the region to deploy into, which will be US Central 1. And then instead of setting up a container image to deploy, instead I'm going to click this button here, which is continuously deploy new revisions from a source repository. And now this is going to use another Google Cloud service called Cloud Build to connect, in my case, GitHub to Cloud Build and then to Cloud Run. So I'm going in here, my provider is GitHub. You could see you could also use Bitbucket, or you could use the Google Cloud source repositories. And then I need to specify the repository that I want to deploy. And I'm going to specify my Hello Netcat repository. And then let's go see, I don't want to do any mirroring, so we'll just go to next. And then I need to specify my branch. And I believe, let me go double check this. If we go to GitHub, I believe that in my case, the branch name is master, but let's go double check this here. So here's my Hello Netcat repo that I'm going to be deploying, and my branch name is master. So let's go change that branch to master there. Okay, and then I can tell it how I want to build this application. You'll remember that this particular repo was using a Dockerfile to create the container, and so I'm going to select Dockerfile in this case. There is another way that you can use, which means that you don't have to provide a Dockerfile, which is called build packs. And build packs can take Go, Node, Python, Java, and .NET applications, and it just will figure out how to create the container image for you. And I'll show you more about that in a few minutes. But this particular repo that I'm deploying has a Dockerfile, so I'm going to select Dockerfile. Okay, so now I have told Cloud Run, the repository that I'm going to be deploying, and I've told it how to build that repository. And then I can come in and set all those same settings that I set before, but I don't need to change any of those. And then I'm going to allow all traffic, and I'm going to allow unauthenticated invocations. And so let's now continue on here and hit create. Okay, so now what this is actually doing is it's not deploying that source code, that repository yet. Instead, what it's doing is it's setting up a cloud build, which will, it's called a build trigger, which whenever I make changes to my GitHub repo, it will automatically then rebuild and redeploy those changes. And so you'll see it's setting everything up, setting up the service, creating the cloud build trigger, and then it's actually doing the build and doing the deploy on the service. And it looks like it's done. Nope, not quite yet, still working on it. So still doing the build and deploy. So we can actually go see the build logs and see what actually is going on. Looks like, here we go, it's coming in and doing a build on this thing, doing a Docker build, and there we go. Looks like it's all working through the process, and there we go. Now it's actually finished deploying. If we go back here, there we go. We see that it's deployed, and if we come in and open this URL there, now we see, oh, it says hello there instead of hello world on that one. So that's great. Now let's go actually see how that actually works. And I need to sign into GitHub. So let's go sign in here. So I can go make a change. Oh, and I need to get an authentication code. Should have signed in before this, but that should just take a second. 918. There we go. Okay, now that I'm signed into GitHub, now let's go over to my Dockerfile, and I'm going to edit my Dockerfile. Usually you'll use you have a real environment for editing your code, testing your code. You'll send a pull request, that sort of thing. But I'm just going to come and make a quick little change here right in GitHub, and I'm going to commit that change to the master branch. So let's commit that. So as soon as I commit that, then what's going to happen if we go to my cloud build dashboard is we'll see, come to history, we'll see that there's a new build that was just triggered and is getting started. And you'll see it's been running for 9 seconds. We can come in and see the details on this build, but it's going to run this build again and build my new version of my container. It's going to store that container image up on the container registry, and then it's going to do the gcloud run deploy to deploy this service up on Cloud Run. And as soon as this is all done and we make a request over to our application, then it should say my change, which was hello GDG, instead of the hello there, which it was saying before. So takes a minute to go through the whole process of doing the build and doing the deploy, but we should be done here in just a few seconds. Let's see how long the last one took. Was 55 seconds. We're at 55 seconds, so it looks like, hey, it's done. Great. Now let's go back over to our Cloud Run console and go check our ASDF service, and let's go make a request to our service. And now we see, sure enough, that new change that I made has been deployed. So great. So I have automatically, from a source code change, deployed that to Cloud Run. And you'll see that I set that up just by clicking a few buttons and connecting my repo up to Cloud Run and Cloud Build. Okay, so that is our continuous deployment and deploying a service from source code. I did mention build packs, and I want to show you some examples that you can take a look at on the Google Cloud Platform GitHub, and it's called Build Pack Samples. So the build pack samples have a bunch of different samples for different technologies. And if we go look at, let's go to like the sample Python one, you'll see that my repository has my Python application in it, pretty basic Python HTTP server. It has some information about the Python version, the dependencies for this application, which is Flask and HTTP framework. And then it has this file called a proc file, which says how to start up the application. But you'll see there's no Dockerfile in here, nothing that is telling it how to actually build this into a container. And that's the nice thing about build packs, is that there's a tool called build packs that will take this source code and automatically build it into my container image. And then I can click that Run on Google Cloud button, which will do that setup for me, just like we saw at the very beginning. But anyways, check out the build pack samples for some kind of easy to deploy, more technology specific, not so plain Dockerfile and Netcat like my first example. So that's a good place to get started with some more practical examples. Okay, so that's different options for how we create those container images. All right, so let's, I want to show you one other thing before we go to Q&A, which is a real application that I have running on Google Cloud. And I want to show you one of the cool things that I can do with Google Cloud. So I'm on my production project here called James Ward, and I'm going to go to Cloud Run. And what we'll see in Cloud Run is I've got a bunch of different services here for this service called Javadoc Central. And Javadoc Central, I have it running in every different Google Cloud region that there is. So you'll see it just keep scrolling through all the different regions. This website is actually served by a website called javadocs.dev. And when I went to that website, you'll see that it loaded instantly, and it should load instantly for you as well. What this does is it's a little tool for looking up Java documentation. So I can go to like Spring Framework and select Spring Core and select a version, and this is going to load the Javadocs for that particular artifact in Maven Central. But anyways, this should load super fast for you, and the reason for that is that I have it running in all these Cloud Run regions, so it should always be served by something very close to wherever the user is. And then I use a load balancer, so we can come in here to my networking services and load balancing, and we'll see where I've now set up a load balancer. There's the Javadoc Central URL map, and this URL map, it supports HTTPS, has a IP, it has a cert that's automatically managed by Google Cloud, so that's why javadocs.dev is HTTPS. That's great. And then we can see that I've got all of my different kind of connectors for this load balancer. So this is a global load balancer. And what this says is that if a user is near the Asia Southeast 2 region, then it's going to go and use the Cloud Run service running in Asia Southeast 2. So it's going to automatically, the global load balancer is going to automatically route the user to the closest Cloud Run service in the region closest to them. And so this was actually pretty straightforward to get set up. And I'm going to come in and show you my Javadoc. Let's see, I forget the name of this thing. Let's go out to my GitHub, and I'll find the Javadoc, is that what it's called? Javadoc Central, there it is. Okay, so this is a Scala application, and I want to show you the Cloud Build YAML, because the Cloud Build YAML is the piece of technology that tells Cloud Build, whenever I make changes to this repo, it's going to run through all of these steps for my continuous delivery. So first is actually continuous integration and continuous delivery, because I run my tests, make sure that my tests pass, then I create my Docker container, but then I do this I have this little tool called Easy Cloud Run, and Easy Cloud Run does the multi-region deployment for me. It automatically sets up the load balancer, sets up all of the network endpoint groups, sets up everything that is needed to do that deployment to all of the 20 plus regions and have the global load balancer that's automatically sending requests across all those different regions. So pretty straightforward there to do that global deployment of this Javadoc .dev application that's backed by Cloud Run. Okay, so I wanted to show you that, just a little more real world usage there of Cloud Run combined with a global load balancer. So that's just one of the cool ways that we can combine different services on Google Cloud with Cloud Run to do some pretty awesome stuff. All right, so that was really your quick little rundown on Cloud Run and different ways to build containers and deploy them and all the different deployment options and all that kind of stuff. So we are at time for questions. So so feel free to either join the audio and say your question out loud or send it in the chat. But I'm happy to answer any questions about Google Cloud, about Cloud Run, anything, containers, development process, continuous integration, continuous delivery, whatever you need. So yeah, so let me know. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now so I can see the chat. Okay, let me know what your questions are. Okay, I'll ask some questions. Are you all software developers, and what programming languages do you all use? And you can just post in the chat if you want. Anyone? JavaScript. Okay, Abdel does JavaScript. PHP, great. You certainly can do PHP on Google Cloud Run, and we don't yet have the build pack support for it, but there's a lot of examples of how to use Docker files to build PHP applications into containers. For JavaScript with Node, you could use the build packs that I mentioned, so check out those build pack samples for some Node examples there. All right. And Android, great. I've done a little bit of Android development with Kotlin and Java, and it's pretty nice because what I've done in some cases is share a code base between my backend service that's running on Cloud Run and my Android application. So that's a nice way to do development. But okay. Any questions about Google Cloud? Anything? Any burning questions on software development? Yeah, go ahead, Yasmin.
So how can I get any documentation about Google Cloud integrated with PHP, or where do I start?
Yeah, good question. So for PHP, what you'll have to do is have a Docker file that will create your container image. And once you create your container image, then everything else that you saw is just the same. But the only trick for you is going to be to create that Docker file and use the Docker tool. And I'm sure that if you, I've done it in a couple times, but there's a lot of information online about how you containerize a PHP application. So if you just search for Docker container PHP, you'll find, I'm sure, lots of guides on how to create that container image. But once you get that container image and store it on the Google Container Registry, it'll run just fine on Google Cloud Run.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, any other questions about anything? All right. Well, that's all I have for now. This is recorded, so you know, if you missed anything or need to come back to it, then thanks for recording it. But Yeah, and if you have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or email. I'm _James Ward on Twitter and jamesward@google.com for email. So yeah, feel free to let me know if there's anything I can do to help. But really appreciate you all having me, and I'm glad we were able to do this. And hope you all have a good summer. And yeah, hopefully I'll get to come out there in person next year and meet you all in person.
Thank you for being with us today. And we would love to have you here in person
That'd be great.
one day.
Yeah,
Maybe
I hope so. I hope so. All right. Well, thank you all. Have a good, let's see, it's probably your evening, so have a good night.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining me so late.
Thank you.
Have a good day, James. Thank you very much.
Thank you.